So we've talked about, some of the reasons that this gray divorce trend has happened. And so let's pivot a little bit and talk about, what are the unique concerns and challenges that this population is then faced with. Obviously, and this is the same for most people getting divorces, but the same money that's been supporting one household now has to support two. And so both of them are going to take a 25% drop in their standard of living,
That's right.
unless someone is willing to re-educate, get into the workforce, and somehow increase the income coming in. For this population, that's usually not even an option.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that becomes a very big foreboding financial concern. And of course, because they're so close to retirement, they've had this grand retirement plan that now they each get to approach having only half the resources that they were going to have.
Well,
It's a
And
very different view.
that's devastating.
Yeah.
I mean, because the older you get, I'm learning this the hard way too, the harder it is to change. So, if you are used to certain things in life, let's forget multimillionaires, and we're not talking about that. You're worth 10 million and you get divorced and now you're only worth 5 million. Boo-hoo. I couldn't care less. But to your average couple that, teachers, firemen, policemen, mortgage people, that have X and now suddenly have to have half of X. And suddenly, instead of having, the exact car that they want, it's a little less expensive. And instead of taking a cruise twice a year, maybe you do it once a year. And then, of course, you go further down, and I don't mean down, but to a lower income, to your average American who today, their homeowner's insurance premium is almost as high as their mortgage payment. Their car insurance, the average car is 50 G's. This is the worst possible time emotionally, physically, and financially for it to be happening to people. But as you said, it's more than doubled since they came out with that study. It's just the worst of all times for this to happen.
Think about costs of healthcare. So imagine if you've got a couple where you have a stay-at-home spouse or an underemployed spouse and an employee spouse, and maybe they're 3 or 4 years away from Medicare. Well, the employee spouse gets to keep health insurance. The other person doesn't. And so now they have to go get private health insurance. And I got news for you. I just moved from Phoenix into the northern Arizona, more rural community. And as a self-employed person, having to go to the exchanges, because my husband is 61, we're right there. To get health insurance here, first of all, there's one plan for me to choose from, and we are paying $2,400 a month with a $7,000 deductible. So we have to budget $40,000 a year for healthcare until Social Security kicks in. That's insane. So I think that's a huge burden on some of these couples, and especially for the spouse that has delegated the finances for their entire marriage. And that is not
That's
always
right.
the women.
No, that is absolutely correct.
Let me tell you
No,
what, men that know absolutely nothing about finance, doctors and lawyers,
absolutely true.
right?
They're my favorite mortgage clients.
Yeah.
They go, Michael, we trust you. Call our CPA. How much money did you make last year? I have no idea. Just call my CPA.
And
Huh?
so thankfully for those two professions, they can afford to hire the professionals they need. But
Exactly.
imagine for that more stereotypical non-CFO spouse who was the stay-at-home mom and was married for 30 years and now has to deal with managing all of her own finances. It is horrifying. And not only is there a great deal of fear about that, but there's a sense of shame. I talk to a lot of women who are really ashamed of themselves for not being more involved in the finances. And I always tell them, listen, it just wasn't your job. You just haven't been trained in this position. And let me help you get trained in that position so that you can feel competent.